Okay, so at this point, Nagel's talked about that what it is like is exclusive to conscious experience. The reasons we have to talk about what it is like is because consciousness is the only thing in the universe that has this ineffable character that we cannot express what we're talking about except by using comparative language or what it is like. And the point about bats is that there is no way we can express what it is like to be a bat. It's impossible to express that because we are humans and bats are bats, and we are never going to be bats. But this introduces a potential problem, which is that is this extended to others? When we explain our experiences to other people, the closest we can get is to talk about what it is like, what produces the experience for us, what the experience brings about. So an example here, what is it like for you to get burned by a lit match? Is it just what it is like when I get burned? What is the phenomenology? And that's a philosophically technical term, which means what is it essentially or intrinsically like? Only you know what the pain is like. When you tell me or you tell us what the pain is, you use the comparative language. And the question that Nagel wants to bring up is, why must we use that locution for consciousness, but we use it for nothing else in the world? So no other facts about the world or about yourself needs to be expressed in these comparative what it is like language. The only experience that you know the phenomenology of are your own experiences. And when you try to communicate your phenomenology to someone else, the best you can do is to try to get them to have what might be the same phenomenology. And we can never be absolutely sure that it's the same phenomenology. Remember, like, this is the problem of other minds, but it's not really the problem of other minds, which I'm going to bring up in a little bit, because this whole argument is a metaphysical argument. It's not an epistemic argument. So this argument in no way implies the problem of other minds, but there is a reason to believe that when I see the color red, it might not be the exact same color that you see when you see the color red. I can say, okay, what is it like to look at a stop sign? And I can go look at a stop sign and be like, all right, so what is it like when you look at a stop sign? And so I put the stop sign in front of you. I can assume that your phenomenology is the same as mine when I was looking at the stop sign, but I cannot be absolutely sure. There's always this slight doubt that maybe you're seeing a slightly different color than I am. And again, this applies to all of these secondary qualities. When I try to know what is it like for you, the best I can do is imagine what it is like for me to be you, but I can never imagine what it is like for you to be you. I can understand only insofar as I can extend my own subjectivity, but my subjectivity is not the same as your subjectivity. The further away the individual's experience is from our own, the further away we are from understanding what it is like. I'm a lot closer to understanding your consciousness than I am from understanding a bat's, but I don't have full understanding of either your consciousness or a bat's consciousness. So his points about reductionism is that the only way that we can explain consciousness is to explain what is captured by the expression what it is like. So if we're going to reduce consciousness to brain states, then we have to explain this what it's like phenomenology, either about like pain or color sensation or any other mental state, in terms of physical descriptions of matter. And Nagel wants to say that it's impossible. We cannot do that. For one, bringing it back to bats, is that they are simpler objects than us. They're simpler organisms, simpler systems with simpler neurologies. We know a lot more about bat brains than we do our own brains, because we can do a lot more experience on bats. And we, like I said, we can cut them open and look at all these different bat brains. But it wasn't until recently that we were looking at human brains in that same kind of scientific rigor. And even then, we're very far from understanding how the human brain works or what exactly is going on in the human brain. Like I said, neuroscience is still in its infancy, but that's not the problem with this argument. The problem here is that we have really good idea of the physiology of what's going on in a bat's body. We know, and we know what's going on when echolocation is happening. So we know the frequency that the bats are emitting. We know the frequency in which it detects the differences, and we know the physiology of its ears and its auditory system. We've learned all of that all the way down to the neurotransmitters of the brain, from its echo to the actual capture of the insect that is trying to catch. So we've learned all of that. But in doing all of that, we have not captured what it is like to be a bat. We have not captured the conscious experiences of the bat. And there are two really important points I want to highlight in this argument, and I hope that you understand and saw yourself when you're reading it. To reduce consciousness to a brain state is to turn consciousness into something objective, right? So when we're talking about science, when we're talking about analyzing physical matter, we're talking about something objective, third person. Anybody from this overarching view can look down and we will all see the same thing. Consciousness is necessarily subjective. A third person account of consciousness will always leave out the most important part of consciousness, its subjectivity. A third person account of a chair makes sense because chairs are external to all of us. But consciousness is the only thing that is not external to us. It is entirely internal. So reducing consciousness requires turning something that is fundamentally subjective into something that is fundamentally objective, the science. So that's the conceptual barrier, is that it's impossible to turn something that is fundamentally subjective into something that is fundamentally objective, because subjectivity and objectivity are conceptually incompatible. Something cannot be both subjective and objective. If it's subjective, it's not objective, and it's objective, it's not subjective. So the entire goal of reducing consciousness to some other science, neuroscience, biology, chemistry, to physics, is impossible because of the nature of consciousness is fundamentally first person subjective. The second point about this goal of reductionism that Nagel's saying is it's never going to work is that the purpose of reduction is to explain the phenomenon entirely and to provide a more precise explanation of the phenomenon by reducing it to the lower level science. The first personal experience of consciousness is, one, not fully explained when it's reduced. Like I said, it takes away the subjectivity, which is the most important part of it. And two, the reduction does not provide a more precise understanding of consciousness. In fact, any reductionist explanation will be less precise. Our understanding of consciousness comes from us having the experience, not from us understanding the physical makeup of the experience. So these are some more implications of the view that I want you guys to walk away with this knowing. It does not imply solipsism or the problem of other minds. Nagel's not worried about the privacy of consciousness. He assumes that we can comprehend another person's experience and that we can talk about our experiences with one another, and that we, like when I say, this is what happens when I see the stop sign, this is what it's like when I see the stop sign, and you say, well, this is what it's like when I see the stop sign, that we're both attributing mental states to one another. So I'm not assuming that you're a zombie and you're just having this behavior of language and there's nothing else going on in the head. No, I'm assuming fully that you are having some experience, and it is some experience that is close to what I'm having when I'm looking at the stop sign. But Nate wants us to point out that there's a difference between knowing what, like empathy in a sense, knowing what it's like for you, and the objective description, what it is actually like from a third person point of view. And that this is what I mentioned earlier, that this is a metaphysical conclusion. Conscious phenomena cannot be reduced to biology. So this is about the nature of consciousness, the reality of consciousness, and the reality of science, of the external world. It's not an epistemic conclusion like solipsism, the problem of their minds. Those are epistemic problems. So his argument is about the essence and fundamental nature of consciousness, not the knowledge of consciousness, even though it's very much about like we're trying to like maybe know what it's like to be a bat. That's not the point here. The point is that there's this fundamental nature of consciousness, and sure, we're never going to know what it's like to be a bat, but the point here is that we're never going to be able to reduce that fundamental nature of consciousness to some lower science. That's his goal with this paper, is about the metaphysics of of consciousness, of conscious experience, not how we get knowledge of conscious experience. And in fact, if Nagel's view implied solipsism or the problem of other minds, then his thought experiment wouldn't even work, because if we can't even know that, if I can't know that my students have minds, then surely I can't know that bats have minds. So it's like, if I have a problem with ascribing mental states to my fellow human beings, then I don't know how I can have that problem, but then jump and start talking about non-human animal mental experiences or mental states. And then another very important point is that Nagel's position does not refute physicalism. Just because there's an explanatory gap between consciousness and descriptions of matter, between this first person experience and third person description, does not mean that consciousness is not physical. So it's compatible to believe that it's incomprehensible to discuss consciousness as brain states, but also believe that consciousness is physical. Just because we can't comprehend it doesn't mean that it's not physical. There's a way to make that work. I think that might be a more difficult route of reasoning, that many people who read Nagel and but seriously buy into this argument end up being some sort of dualists, especially about conscious states. But it's not a necessary implication of his view. Okay, so that's it for Nagel. What's the takeaway here? I don't know if this affects your decision to be a physicalist or a dualist, but I'm hoping that if you're a physicalist, it casts some doubt onto your physicalist viewpoint. But then I hope if you're a dualist, that the physicalist arguments that I've given, like Turing and Papineau, somehow cast doubt on your dualist point of view. So what's the whole point of this? Is just casting doubt on your current beliefs, and then maybe strengthening your beliefs. Like if you're a dualist, then maybe this can somehow strengthen your belief in dualism.